live? And we're live. Yes. And of course, it's in glorious 360p. 360p. Alright. Okay, on my... Alright. Okay, that's good. Well, hello. Right, okay. Let's not look at this face anymore. Get that rid. Well, distractions suck. Anyway, hello. My name's Jailus, and on this live stream, I'm going to be discussing the latest up-to-date news that's been happening within the technology industry. And one of the things I'm going to cover first is going to be 3D stacking, the future of technology. And I will cover also chiplet-based architecture, as that is the way that I can definitely see the industry going towards in decentralizing hardware. So instead of all being one silicon, it's all one small little chiplets that get added on, as efficiency gains are starting to become. Anyway, as I was saying before, as efficiency gains and clock speed is becoming extremely hard to get as time goes on, due to various constraints such as power and heat dissipation. And the heat, companies are within the industry outside look at many other ways of improving performance, improving both the amount of power that's used for a specific operation, and that's where chiplet-based architecture comes in. Now, first off, after that I would discuss the latest news with regards to AMD Zen 3, Intel's own, well, what can I say, it's a repeat of 10 nanometers with regards to their shambles of a process node. Oh boy, Intel, you're so silly. And the fact that we are no doubt going to see price hikes on AMD side. And I will also be covering Nvidia in regards to their A100 benchmark, and let's just say doesn't look that good. Doesn't look that good in terms of rasterized performance, but Ampere is basically a architecture developed for ray tracing, and I'll also be discussing on the way AMD's could do their ray tracing instead, because two companies cannot use the same one unless it's open source, which Nvidia, they don't like open source. They do not like it whatsoever. So, oh, that's boiling. That's hot. Webcam's hot. Maybe I should get god, I don't have the fan to it. But anyway, so I'll be, well, first off, I'll be covering, as I said, 3D stacking. Now 3D stacking has become well talked about because over time, as in the past, generally, if you shrink the node, you get a bump in clock speed, namely number one. You get a reduction in the amount of power usage for that same operation, and you can make the whole CPU more denser because of a smaller lithography. Now, that did hold up true with regards to Moore's law, which is more of an observation than an actual law, in that every 2 years, back when Gordon Moore, their head of Intel, previously head of Intel, made the observation that with each 2 years, the number of transistors will double within the CPU, and performance will most likely go up along with the transistor count. But as time passed by, it quickly was revised to 3 years for transistor density, namely because it was getting harder to shift to new nodes, getting more expensive, and more technologies need to be adapted for it, to a point where there are only about three major competitors right now that are on the latest node, so 7 nanometers on Samsung's end. On TSMC's, they're about to hit 5 nanometers next year. I think 5 nanometers sort of in risk production. And Global Foundries. Yeah, no, I meant for Intel. Well, as I stated earlier, they are not going to be. They're going to be delaying their 7 nanometers product line for about another 6 to 12 months. So up to around 2023. Yep. But anyway, of course, with it becoming more expensive, only few companies can afford to keep up with the latest nodes, and so that, and due to the rising costs associated with actually designing silicon for it, namely the mask that is blueprints for the CPUs and GPUs and other electronics, SoCs in particular, are becoming extremely expensive to the point where you only can remake a few because each mask costs several millions, several tens of millions to even $100 million just to make. Now there are technologies coming out to mitigate this, namely EU3, which effectively removes some layers removes the levels of complexity, and it makes it more accurate to actually making the traces for the CPUs. But that will only offset it by a small amount. The main cost is still there, but it's small little things just to reduce the amount of steps they have to go through in order to make the CPU. Now, what has companies done in the past is that they have either increased the core size of the silicon. We've seen this with the fact that more and more silicons becoming bigger in order to compete with each other. And of course, as time has gone on, it's becoming more and more, as time goes on, even though you're getting smaller and smaller, you actually are starting to hit walls associated with frequencies, namely that from every node you go on, you lose a bit more frequency due to the fact that you're working on imperfect node, and so you have to do extraordinary work in order to get a little clock boost on a product that's on a new node in regards to CPUs. On GPU ends, it hasn't hit the gigahertz frequency wall, namely because of a massive compute, mainly because they're massive compute cards and they require a lot of power. They're still scaling in terms of frequency. Now, the main problem in regard to trying to scale is that you're hitting walls on how fast you can supply the data, and comes to this point where low latency and, well, essentially low latency memory is required, and ultra fast memory bandwidth is absolute necessity. Now I'll move on to the work that AMD's been doing with their chiplet-based architectures, because their architecture that they have designed for Zen 2, but Zen 1 plus Zen 1 with the Epic lineup, is that they decided to make smaller silicon, but have it so that they develop a new technology, namely Infinity Fabric, to help with communications across the PCB on the chips of the CPU. Now, of course, that proved to be very good, considering that despite running at 32 cores, AMD's been able to get 3.2 gigahertz on their Threadripper lineup, which is 32 cores on 32 cores running at 3.2, 3.3 gigahertz is astounding, really, considering Intel's struggling to hit about 3 gigahertz on their ultra mature 14 nanometer architecture. Now, the main problem is that many of these CPUs are hitting into frequency memory bottlenecks, where they are not getting enough data supplied to them fast enough, and you can see this directly by overclocking Zen 1, the memory on Zen 1, Zen 2, and Zen Plus as well, overclocking memory frequency, and on Zen 2, overclocking the fabric, Infinity Fabric, to allow faster communications and a faster transport of data. Now, what AMD's done with chiplets is quite good, but they're hitting walls with regards to memory frequencies, and so that leads us on to 3D stacking. Now, what is 3D stacking? Essentially, it is similar in chiplet design, but instead of doing separate chips on the package, separated but connected via Infinity Fabric, you would have, or any other technology, you would have the chips on top of each other. So in this case, if you take Zen 2's I/O die, instead of having Zen 2 I/O die here and having 2 cores side by side below the Zen 2 core, Zen 2 I/O die, you would have the cores on top of the silicon for the I/O die, And what this allows you to do is effectively cut down on latency, power. There's well, there's a number of benefits, but one of them is the fact that you're reducing the amount of space it takes to travel from one silicon die to another, and you can have high bandwidth direct connections from the cores directly onto the I/O die, allowing for instantaneous communication while still benefiting from chiplet design. Now, with regards to the 3D stacking, there are numerous benefits that have been highlighted by TSMC, as they stated. If you design a architecture around 3D stacking, you can expect to have performance efficiency gains, so the amount of watts it takes to do a certain operation to be massively decreased by the number of operations can be done within a certain power envelope to be increased by up to 700 times. And this is easy to see why, because the processing of logic, so 1 plus 1 equals 2, only effectively, it's very minuscule amounts. We're talking single digit picowatts, whereas the transporting of that data from one end of a die to another is that it's in the easy three digits like 300 to 400 watt and picowatts. So that's roughly about 50 to 70 times the number of 7 times the amount of energy that's required to move that exact same data from one end to another. Now, by stacking the silicon dies on top of each other, you reduce the area, reduce the distance of the paths that the silicon has to travel, because they only have to travel upwards directly. Well, upwards directly. My apologies. Condolences for that. Well, anyway. And you can, well, as instead of it go through multiple ups and downs, it just goes straight up and straight to the core. Now, this will decrease power and decrease the power consumption of performing a certain operation. And another benefit this can also be utilized is you can put NAND chips on top of the silicon dies. Now, by doing this, you are having on inbuilt massive memory chips that can hold a lot more data than traditional data storage in CPUs, namely cache, has been, because with CPU cache, they're usually in the range of about 10 to about 20 megabits. On Zen 2, it goes up to 70 megabits. That's in total together. But with having 3D stacking, you can have a lot more memory chips on there. So about an extra from 128, 256, 512, or even 1 gigabyte or 2 gigabyte memory chips on top. Now, what this does is that it allows more data to be taken in a single go, send it up to the memory, and then when the CPU is ready for that instruction or the set data that it needs to process in order to complete the operation, it just needs to request for that data to be accessed from the NAND chips instead of going all the way to RAM and requesting for that. This in theory decreases the latency of the operations as you are becoming less reliant on having ultra fast memory on the RAM, although it will benefit as well, but not to the extent that having onboard NAND chips will. And we can see this in Intel's i7 5750C CPU. And I will get up for you. This CPU had a L4 cache. Well, it was another level cache, but instead of well, and what this has done is it allowed it to, quite frankly, nearly, well, allowed it to perform quite admirably despite the low clock speeds in games. And I'll just get the die shot now. Give it a, aha, got it. Right, hold on a sec. Oh, there goes my OBS. But yeah, this is a i7 7775K at 5C, where this entire chip is just additional memory, and although it doesn't stay on CPU thread, it did have 64 gigabytes of L4 cache. Now, in regards to the potential of having onboard memory, is that you can, well, maybe process, but also you reduce the amount of power that's required to request stuff, and it will also benefit GPUs, especially because they require a lot of data. They're massive compute power base, and sometimes they need a large amount of power. And what's the best way to keep their cores continuously going is to have memory, the memory chips on top, as close to the silicon as possible in order to reduce latency. Now of course, with regards to silicon and 3D second square triplets, is that if you were to do all of this on a single monolithic die, it's not only going to cost you more in terms of number of silicon you have to, number of silicon wafers you have to use in order to get X amount of chips out of it, because of a thing called silicon lottery or density defect ratio, which is effectively the number of defects within a process. So it might be a faulty transistor, it might be a faulty line, one of the processes didn't go as well, and so some CPUs work, some CPUs don't have proper connections, but general, it's usually referred to as a defect ratio, and it's been told as a yield. But with regards to the bigger silicon, the more chances of it having a defective area where you cannot use it. Now, with regards to chiplets, because you're already separating the, well, that's what chiplets are, separating the various things such as the cores from the main memory controllers, I/O dies, and all the other additional bits are within the CPU and GPU. But it decreases the size of the silicon that you need to manufacture, and so it does remove the size of the mask that's required to print one of these, but it also improves the chances of you getting a functional silicon, and it also improves your chances of getting a extremely power efficient silicon die and we've seen this with Zen the R R9 3900X and 3950X 100X, and because they both, even though one's 16 core and that's the 3950X, and the other one's a 12 core, the 3900X, the amount of watts they use is. Can I? One sec. Let me try. No, that's not. Man, that. Wait, tech power. That's it. 3950X versus. Sorry about this. Bench mark. Can I? Well, it looks like I can't find it, but I remember that both of the CPUs consumed the exact same power. Now, this is because of silicon lottery with the way that the two cores, way that the 3900X and the 3950X is laid out is two 8-core chiplets and one IO die. Now, one of the 8-core chiplets on the 3900X is a perfect yield, so it's a very good yield. But the other one is, yeah, it's okay-ish, but it's just within the power limit. But with the 3950X, both dies are of good yield, so they both consume the same amount of power as each other, and within a particular power envelope, so about 60 watts per each, well, 60 to 90 watts per each at max, so full stress in pure wattage terms, not TDP, because that's just heat dissipation. Now, this is all possible because you're effectively separating the logic that the processing units which scale well with node shrinks, and you separate from other things such as controllers, memory controllers, and all the other utilities that make up the CPU that doesn't scale well with decreased with a new node, and this is why AMD's elected to manufacture their Zen 2 products, and specifically the IO die on GlobalFoundries 14 nanometers, and decided to make their cores on TSMC, or Taiwanese Semiconductor Manufacturer, on 7 nanometers, their own 7 nanometers, which is a bloody good node, to be honest. Now, 3D stacking, as stated, will improve various things such as decrease the amount of energy and the amount of time it takes to reduce the latency, and combined with that, as well as the chiplet design where you can decrease the energy even further, it makes for a very, very good processor. Now, another thing that is also beneficial of 3D stacking and chiplet based architecture is that if you make, say, about 50 different chiplets, so things like you make a GPU, but you make chips for anti-aliasing, or you make dedicated ray tracing chips, or you make there's other things like enhanced chip and decoders or compressors or decompressors encoding silicon. What you can do with chiplet based architecture in conjunction with 3D stacking is you can do a pick and mix situation where you, if you want a silicon or well CPU to do decoding and encoding as well as decompression and compression well, but you don't need the anti-aliasing at all, or you don't want any of the graphics processing unit. You can just literally plug those few bits of silicon, have a connection to it, and that's done. But if you want like a APU that has onboard ray tracing capabilities, onboard anti-aliasing chip, as well as memories to improve its gaming performance, and one and quite a few CPU cores, then you can, and you don't have to design a new CPU. And what's even more, you can keep some of the silicon, such as a few chips like memory control chiplets, on a older node to cut costs and um, to and not only that you are doing it on a more refined, so you're getting more per wafer, but you won't have to design the silicon mask, every time you move to a new node, and that will improve on cost effective. It's very cost effective. Now, apart from, now the other benefits that you can use with 3D stacking, you can use more area within the CPU to put your CPU together, and as well as GPU, because although you can go about 800 to 900 millimeters squared, if you have quite a bit of space left over in the top bit, then you can make it a bit taller, like add a small memory chip to improve the latency as well as the improve power efficiency of it. Now, the main problem with 3D stacking is, well, it's quite a few. Number one, with 3D stacking, there will be a lot of areas of fault. So instead of a traditional monolithic die, where the fault lines you usually get are the area which the CPU connects to the motherboard, and then it's the areas in which the capacitors on the CPU connect to each other, or they function. Another one is that the connections between the PCB and the silicon itself. But with chiplets, you are adding more layers, so you are effectively adding more fault lines within the CPU. So if you have two CPU dies, the main problem with silicon is that it goes through, well, with any material, it goes through a thing called thermal expansion, where the more hotter it becomes, the more bigger it becomes. The more cooler it becomes, the more smaller it becomes, which is why when people do overclocking, extreme overclocking, they use liquid nitrogen in order to keep the thing cold, but also to reduce the size of the transistors slightly, to decrease the distance in which electricity has to travel, and that's why they get to absurd lengths like 6.37 gigahertz, 8 gigahertz on certain chips. And the main problem with higher temperatures is that your clock frequency also goes down and you degrade the silicon even faster that way. Now, the ways of combating this increase in amount of heat that you have to quickly remove from the middle, because although your CPU says it's running at 60 degrees, that's only temperature outside of the die. Inside it's usually running at around, well, the outside, if it's reporting on hardware info as 60-70 degrees, the actual silicon itself is running at 90-100 degrees, which is known as 2J junction. Now with regards to coolant, there are a few ways you can do cool it 3D stacking. Number one is to water cool it directly with a liquid that is non-conductive but has excellent thermal properties directly on the die or on the CPU. I actually got a CPU right here. Usually you'll hook up a cooler on top of the cap of a CPU, but you can remove the cap. I wouldn't advise it at all. I would highly say no, don't, because it's very easy to bug up silicon. You only need a little pressure, then you fucked it up. But yeah. The second way is water cooling with a non-electrically conductive liquid directly from the die itself. Now the only problem is that you have to worry about the it actually separating from the package. Another thing you can try to mitigate is use different materials on the actual chip, because this is usually nickel and copper plated inside, and although it does good, you can with more materials, namely graphene, which is still in its infancy in terms of development, and the fact that it works exceptionally well horizontally, where it's able to transfer heat very fast across, but it doesn't transfer well vertically, so through the material. So instead of going upwards, well, vertically is going upwards, horizontally is going across the material. Now, because of that, you go up to low clock frequency, so power will have to come down. But because silicon has already got so good to a point where laptop CPUs are able to run at on AMD side 4.1 gigahertz boost on one core, but about 4 gigahertz on all core, as far as I remember, on the Ryzen 9 4900 HS, that you don't have to worry necessarily as much, but it will still be quite hot to a point where it might go down in clock speed dramatically from what we used to now. Another problem with 3D stacking is that it's going to be the packaging itself is going to be more expensive, as you need to use more processors in order to ensure that the silicon itself stays attached to. to each other. Now, AMD has done this quite successfully in the past with their Vega, um, the Vega series, the AMD R9 Fury, Nvidia as well with regards to their Titan Volta series, as well as the V100 and their latest A100, which I will cover soon. Now, this, well, the package itself will be expensive, but that should, so. Damn it, my nose. Why is my nose always this? Terrible. There's my bit. Anyway, where was I? But yeah, go for a second. I forget. Well, oh yeah, the cost for the packaging of 3D stacking should be offset by the chiplets design, but still, the only problem is that RMAs are probably going to be increased by a decent proportion because of the added amount of points of failure, but the potential performance gains are very, very attractive, especially in ultra thin clients. So things like small nil phones, nil devices. If you want something to, namely, if you want something small as a watch to be able to process something like location data um, or to be able to handle video, I suppose. And then stuff like 3D stacking of chips will become quite ubiquitous in the future as technology um, continues to get smaller, but as the performance gains are becoming a lot less pronounced, so to speak. And of course, companies do need to add performance in order to justify, in order to continue existing. They cannot just, well, especially if you're Intel and there's no market competition, then you can just add 2 to 3%. But looks like we are not going to be in that region, hopefully, for that long, for the next few years. Nevertheless, it'll be interesting to see how Intel and AMD approaches, as well as Nvidia and ARM as well. Right, now I've covered 3D stacking. I am going to be talking about AMD's Zen 3 architecture and a bit on Linus Torvalds rant on Intel's AVX pipe dream and pixie dust. Now, I'll do Linus's fit secondary. I'll first be talking about AMD. With, as reported by Jim at Adore TV in regards to the latest leaks with Zen 3 architecture. According to his source, AMD's own Zen 3 architecture is going to improve the floating point unit performance by about a few percentages, but the main gain of the new architecture is a 20% improvement in the integer performance. Now, in regards to integer, that is more suited for single-threaded purposes, whereas floating point is more of a high performance computing area. And so I I would not put it past AMD on their next 4000 series main desktop lineup to begin touting their gaming performance even more than they have already. And in regards to that, um, what do I what do I think about the what they could do with the 14nm IO die that's found on Zen 2? I think they are going to stick with it on the 14nm manufacturing of the IO die because it's already there, unless they want to move to 7nm and do an improvement on it, so better memory, support, maybe perhaps uh, better memory support, namely, and a few extra bells and whistles. Because the main thing that has been lately discussed by um, Tom from Moore's Law is Dead is that there was a bunch of features that was supposed to be coming with Zen 1, which was delayed to Zen 2, as namely AMD was just wanted to get the entire Zen 1 out quickly because they were pretty much nearly bankrupt. Now, I could see features that were planned for Zen 2 initially coming over to Zen 3. Now, what this could be, no idea. Not a single clue, but I can tell there's going to be more features on it. In the much same way that, Vega promised things like rapid packed mass, primitive shaders. Yeah, I remember those times, and yeah, that didn't come well. But the PS4 Pro did have that, and we've seen this with regards to Wolfenstein, Shadow of the New Colossus. Um, but yeah, and I could easily see AMD just making a mockery of Intel's latest architecture, namely the 10-core Comet Lake. And now that segues on to Linus's, which was a segue on to Intel quite nicely actually. Is that Linus Torvald, the creator of Linux, I believe, has recently went on a rant saying that he hopes that AVX 512-bit or advanced vertex extensions, which I honestly don't know what they do, not a single clue. Hopes he that well, somewhat I do. It's mainly for high compute purposes, so massive amounts of data, which in reality can be easily achieved rather nicely with a GPU, but also Intel's still trying to cling on to that market. But anyway, he's hoping that AVX 512-bit dies a painful death. Well, and you look back on history, during the heydays of Intel, and this is largely true, Intel held the reins of performance power, and they were universally liked. Not when they had the high performance computing market, but when they had integer based performance that are more that scales much better with real world performance. So things like small benchmarks, nothing big like nothing big like uh, DNA sampling or virus research, but simple benchmarks like running games, running Microsoft Word, Excel, as well as browsers and video editing, photo editing. Um, when Intel focused on integer, those benchmarks performed exceptionally well on Intel products because they prioritize integer performance rather than floating point performance, which AMD and all the other companies that were manufacturing CPUs focused on. And so, well, other companies focused on FP floating point performance, whilst Intel focused on integer. But that's when they were effectively kin. Now, with Intel's been moving to running their AVX lineup, which problem with AVX is that the biggest problem is that the biggest problem with AVX might I got an error. Why? Probably my internet connection. Well, but anyway, the reason why AVX really is a detriment to real world performance is because if you have a application or a tab open that uses AVX, if your motherboard comes with preset AVX offsets, which basically lower your clock speeds when there's a AVX load being run on the CPU, it will lower the performance. Now, if you have things like power savings, eco savings, those kind of power savings on your computer, you can see your own clocks go down by about 10%. Now, given the fact that you can easily run AVX on all cores at high speed, and that this AVX offset as well, which is quite frankly you should never enable it. Why you have it on? I don't know. Why would you have it on unless you can't run it on your overclock? But namely, you just decrease the overclock. Now, apart from that, the main problem is that what applications do use AVX? We don't know. The only benchmarks that I can think of that would use it are, well, that benchmarks and things like advanced folding. Well, that's if advanced folding, advanced gene cell folding or virus folding use it, and a few other applications. They don't really benefit that much to the regular average Joe. And so with the fact that Intel's been prioritizing AVX out of all the things, it's no big question why AMD's quickly dominating the market. And in regards to AMD's dominance and Intel's continued slithering way into the obscurity lane, it's recently been announced on an investors call that Intel's 7 nanometers is delayed by 6 months, and the yields are 12 months behind schedule. So yay, great. Really? Intel, why? From 2014 of the, you said that 10 nanometers might be a bit delayed. 2015, 10 nanometers still delayed. 2016, nanometers delayed, and then you didn't get it until 2019. Was it 2018? Let me check the first 10 nanometers CPU. It was Canon Lake. I know. Laptop. It was Canon Lake. Yeah. Canon Lake CPU. When is this? Back in. Ah, yes. There was a Canon Lake CPU that was released, but it was released only in the Chinese market under small new laptops, and well, it it suffered from terrible yields and as a result low clock speeds and high power consumption. That was even making that was even making the 40 nanometers early yields look good. But yeah, the only thing that Canon Lake released was it was an i3 8121U, and let me get that up. i3 8121U. And just let me quickly get that, and yeah. And so this was released back in 2018. 2.2 gigahertz, 2 cores, 4 threads, 15 watts. Now that's just, what the hell it was Intel even thinking? And no wonder why it only had one. No, they've removed it outright. They've removed it outright. But yeah, actually, it's not even on the i3 line. They've removed it. Oh, Intel, hiding your failures. Oh my god, what the hell are they doing? What the hell are they doing? I don't know. What the hell is Intel doing? Yeah, I mean, what's the B? There's a B version. 4 cores, 8 threads. B. 4 cores, 4 threads. And that's released for mobile. Oh well. Nevertheless, this ain't spelling well for Intel at all. I don't really think Intel is going to be able to compete for about good 3 to 4 years, unless they move to chiplet design in order to offset the yield problem. But they haven't shown a sign. Right now, in regards to Intel again, it's been recently announced that Dr. Murphy, yes, I can't pronounce his name really. He's called Dr. Murphy. I'll just call him Dr. Murphy rather. Has resigned, and as leaked by Jim at Door TV, Ryan Murphy had clearly been on a power trip, namely with him looking like he was trying to get into the CEO, according to people within Intel. That was told by Jim at Door TV, and with my knowledge on things like politics in regards to that, I could definitely see this was the reason why Dr. Murphy resigned, was because the head of Intel, Bob Swan, knew what he was doing, and given the fact that Jim Keller had left Intel a few months back, and even though he's only been at that company for about 1 year, it kind of says a bit about and given the fact that there's quite a few people saying that Ryan Murphy's clearly on a power trip, it really says something that the entire culture, or the entire societal fabric of Intel is very much reminiscent of a big government. I mean, the people that want to do good are often faced by power-hungry tyrants, essentially, who want just more power and don't care. And given the fact that Ryan Murphy was also the one that was reporting on all the 7nm stuff that later came to light as being delayed. And he was reporting saying they were excellent and excited by the progress of the 7nm. Yeah, he had it coming. He had it coming. He had it coming, really. Now, at this point, I'll segue on to my last topic in regards to technology right now, and that is in regards to Nvidia's A100 benchmarks, because it came out recently that on Octane, which is a compute-based architecture, no, a compute-based benchmark. Why did I say compute time manager? Okay, we put band on that word. Anyway, their score on Octane was 443. Now, on Octane, let's put something like what's the thing? It was V100 benchmark, which was Nvidia's previous high end. It makes no sense to compare. It makes no sense to compare a 2080 Ti to a well, it makes absolutely no sense to compare a 2080 Ti to a quite frankly this, because it is two fundamentally different products. And according to the results, the Tesla V100 with 32 gigabytes of RAM Titan V is apparently 401. The Quadro GV100, which is a Quadro GV100, is has scored 350 points on Octane, and that is what? That looks like a what was the specs for it? Can I see the specs? What's the specs for it? Ah yes, 4,608 CUDA cores, 576 Tesla cores, and 72 RT cores with 48 gigabytes of GD6 memory. Now, in comparison to Nvidia's A100 specs, that is, it has a shader count of 6, 9, 12 shaders. The tensor cores is down from 576 6, but again, Ampere is a ray tracing improvement on ray tracing more than um, well, rasterization, and so naturally they're going to decrease the size of it in order to add more shader cores and TMUs, texture mapping units, and rasterizing units. Now, given the fact that it was running not using RT cores, and well, we just do simple calculations. Calculator, right? Pardon me. Now, with regards to Intel's own shading unit, so let's say that you get, so you divide 69 by 12, divide by 400 and no, back the number of shaders, that equals 1.5. So already the performance gain is exactly half of it, and given the fact that the clock frequency, now I have to find the clock frequency of the Quadro card. Actually, no, that I got the wrong one. I got the RTX 8000 series, not the GVA 1000. Well, anyway, so we go back with 12. No, not times. Okay, I'll do it on my keyboard. Spell. Okay, then you divide that by 512. You get 35%. And so 35%, let's keep it listed down. So I'll bring up this. Yeah, okay, 35. Yeah, my terrible drawing. 35%, okay. So you erase that. Now what we do is we figure out 300 and we figure out how much percentage is 403 divided by 5. No, wrong. 430 divided by 3. Yeah, that. So it's already we got a measurement of 25. Well, it's 25 performance, but I just realised I've done it in regards to from there. So that's, wait, so 400. I'll do maths on my head. So if you divide, so you have to get about 80. You have to get about 89 percentiles. Okay, so let's do this simple way. We just do that, divide by 89, which is difference, times that by 100. 30, yeah, so about 39%. I'm not sure if that's maths wrong, but it sounds very close. It is very close. So about 39%. Now, that means that Turing has 30% more cores, but because scaling is not 100% linearly, I would say 80%. I'll say 95%. So 95%. So instead of it being about 35% performance uplift, it'll be 32. So the IPC has definitely increased by remaining percentage points of the performance gain is generally got to be 7%. But here's the thing. The GV100 has a max power consumption of 250 watts. That has a power consumption of 400 watts. And the GPU clock is about 1.4 gigahertz, I should say. So we look for GV100, and according to this, the clock performance is 33. So already the performance gain of it, and the fact that memory performance is also increased, means that at the cost of additional power, about 1.6% more power, 1.6 times more power, you got about a 30% increase in core clock, and a 35% increase in core count. You got about 35% in core count, so about around that region. So if you were to go back to calculator, where did I put my calculator? And bear in mind, this is on TSMC's latest node, so let's say 250 times by, let's say 30, times by 1.3, which is 30%. You already got 350 watts if you just increase this frequency by increase the core count by about 35%, to be generous. I'm being generous here in this regard. Then you increase clock speed, which will probably be about, depending on scaling, it probably be about an additional 1.8 times. You already hit the 400. You already hit the 400 watts limit, and it kind of makes me believe that, and considering this is on that they are able to achieve this on TSMC's 7 nanometers, and considering that it looking like Nvidia ain't going to be on TSMC's 7 nanometers, instead on Samsung's 10 nanometers. Well, they term it 8 nanometers, but it's essentially an improvement on 10. They say 8 nanometers, but it's reality it's improved 10 nanometers. I can see these being Power Hawk, the new Ampere GPUs, and as Moore's law, as the coolers have been shown around, considering the amount of fins it has in comparison to the other cards, and considering the TDP has increased quite a bit, yeah, I just can't see how these will be exactly like what Vega was, hot, and it will be loud. If they have about 350 watts, and they just better have a good cooling solution. But I can easily see RDNA 2, which is going to come out soon, will be in a very good competitive point where Nvidia, because they're namely they're trying to haggle their way to get cheaper 7 nanometer production, and they underestimated AMD's partnerships with TSMC, they becoming TSMC's main featuring main featured company alongside Apple. Um, I just can't see how they will have the same power efficiency as Turing and Pascal. And I mean, Nvidia doesn't have a good relationship with TSMC before, because they had originally planned, I believe it was their Maxwell generation to go on 16 nanometers or 22 nanometers, but it was lagging behind, so they went with 28 nanometer instead, and just improving the architecture massively on the same architectural node. And the reason why Pascal was a massive jump, not the TI, not the 1080 Ti, that was an exception. That's why when they moved, it became quite power efficient, and you were able to clock the graphics cards quite high. Now, the only thing I can see Nvidia being able to hold back AMD is on things like ray tracing, because they have early technology they do not share. Their software is known as black box to all developers. They're notoriously hard to optimize because Nvidia don't like sharing their code. It's the very epitome of their naming scheme, Nvidia, which means envy. And envious people always are, too greedy. And, well, a bit of irony, I suppose. Now, I said it in the past with regards to earlier in the stream on that there will be a different technology in which AMD uses to Nvidia's ray tracing technology, and this is because of a few things back in history with AMD's namely with tessellation and AMD's hair effects. Nvidia's version of hair effects is called Hairworks, but AMD's one is called Tress FX, and this is because Nvidia create their own version. We've seen this with regards to The Witcher 3, where Nvidia, initially early on, AMD was closely in partnership with CD Projekt Red in the making of Witcher, but then last minute, well, I say last minute, it was in the last about year, Nvidia quickly took over and introduced a new Hairworks that was very notorious in destroying performance. And Nvidia has always been doing this, especially on tessellation, another technology that was used to a point where, although it would affect Nvidia's GPUs, they put it to a point where they will still have good frame rates, but AMD's, because of a lack of drivers, a lack of the technology itself, would suffer even more. We've seen this with, I believe, Hawks 2. We've seen this with various things such as Hawks 2 and the fact that the top performing AMD GPU was losing out massively, as shown in this graph, to arguably mid-range Nvidia drivers, and of course that's because they done the Hairworks and all the other technologies on effectively x64 times 64 times 16, whereas Whereas in reality, you can't really tell the difference after um, eight, eight times maximum tessellation. I mean, yeah, if you zoom in pretty quickly, you can see everything. But yeah, another thing that Nvidia sometimes does is uh, they uh, they purposely limit the amount of colours displayed on GPUs so to get a small performance win. Uh, well, Nvidia's, well, what you expect is envy. I mean, Nvidia's company's name means envy. They just want everything for themselves, really. But yeah. And now, in regards to ray tracing, AMD's ray tracing software seemed, well, very chromy, and that's because they can't make exact replica of it because um, Nvidia owns the patent on it, so they have to design their own. And my guess, that's the reason why it looked a bit off, because we are judging ray tracing based on Nvidia's example. Now, what do I think AMD's ray tracing performance will be in between Turing and Ampere? So about good, better than Turing, but not as good as Ampere, which, when I said earlier, Ampere is going to be a ray tracing beast. But in terms of just general purpose rasterization, it will be about 30% performance gain. At most, I would say. We won't see a doubling performance that we saw with the GTX 1080 Ti, unless AMD effectively does the same marketing as their Vega line marketing. And yeah, you see these slides. There was a specific slide I remember. It was very. It tricked Nvidia and tricked most consumers that thought this was going to be a big thing. Where was it? There was a Pacific. Aha, here. Up to 2 times faster than the competition. Now that's already up to, but considering that Nvidia's GTX 1080 Ti Tech Power Hub, for going Tech Power Hub, considering that was about if I go on there, I should found this edition. Considering that was about twice. We go on this one. Well, it was twice. It was effectively a more powerful GPU, something that, well, in comparison to the previous Ti, which was 980 Ti, that's about it performs 160 faster on the 1080 Ti performed 167% more faster, well, more better than the 980 Ti, and that's because Nvidia was taken in by the marketing, the failed marketing, I would say, was it seemed like it seemed like marketing that Raja Kaduri namely done himself. We've seen this within regards to his plans to have there was plans in work previously to in one of the companies that Raja worked, and he was very much of it, to have a GPU on a product basically unfurled on the aircraft carrier, and it was reported in Jim's video. I need to find the link for it, but I can't remember which video. I got to go digging. But yeah, and so I think personally, what do I think from all this? Well, namely that it's getting dark. Namely that technology is going to get quite good, and given the fact that with regards to Polaris, in comparison to Nave especially, there was a very dramatic turn on the marketing, and as the old marketing team that was responsible has all been shuffled along to the wayside, and now new marketing's coming along. I would say that AMD's marketing in particular is going to get much better. It already technically has, as they are not doing anything like the Polaris 50-watt Polaris tech demo of Star Wars Battlefront running at medium settings at 50 watts. Yeah, and that plus GPU was running at 800 megahertz. But yeah, and given the fact that technology, especially with regards to chiplet and the 3D stacking, now getting to past the concept and now being put into testing with regards to Intel's Lakefield. This is going to be an interesting next few years that will make last decade and a half look like they were just lazy. Simply put, we will see smaller processors with better power consumption, better processor, better performance, and potentially even APUs that can play AAA games at 60 FPS medium settings. That's something to look out for. Now that about wraps up for Tech Channel, Tech News for the week. I'll be doing another live stream on good old Wednesday the 5th of August. And anyway, I will also release videos if big information comes through the pipeline as a separate video. But nonetheless, I'll be streaming some Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3s with Cinders mods later on today. That's around 9:30 London time. But I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you next time.